While I was still groggy from surgery, my son Michael informed me he'd sold my family home to cover my medical expenses. But in his rush to cash in, he never realized I still owned the land it stood on. His face turned ashen when I showed him the property documents from my hospital bed. "That's impossible," he stammered. "Everything was supposed to be in Dad's name after he passed." I looked him straight in the eyes and replied, "Your father and I kept separate assets. The house was his. The land has always been mine." The sterile hospital room fell silent. Outside my window, the autumn leaves were falling from the oak trees that lined the hospital grounds, creating a tapestry of oranges and reds against the clear blue sky. It would have been beautiful if not for the suffocating tension that now filled the room. I'd been admitted just 3 weeks earlier for what should have been a routine procedure, complications from an old service injury that had finally caught up with me. After 22 years in the Army, including 3 tours in Afghanistan, my body had decided it was time to collect on old debts. Michael stood at the foot of my bed, still processing what I'd just revealed. At 38, my oldest son had his father's strong jawline and my determined gray eyes, but the coldness in his expression was something foreign to me. He exchanged a loaded glance with his wife Vanessa, who lingered near the doorway, designer, purse clutched tightly against her cashmere sweater. "Mom," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you're confused from the medication. The property is one complete asset. I have the paperwork from the sale right here." He patted his jacket pocket with an air of finality. "No, Michael," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected despite the pain medication. "Your grandfather left me that land before I even met your father. It was never part of the house deed." I reached for the water cup on my bedside table, my hand trembling slightly from both medication and emotion. "I have the documents in my safety deposit box. The land and the house have always been separate properties." Vanessa stepped forward, her diamond earrings catching the fluorescent light from above. "Julia, we're only trying to help. The medical bills are piling up, and the house was just sitting there empty since Robert passed. It made perfect sense to liquidate the asset." The emphasis on asset wasn't subtle. I'd never been just Mom to Vanessa, always Julia, spoken with the faintest hint of impatience, as if addressing someone whose relevance was fading. I noticed she was carrying a new purse, one I'd seen in a designer catalog with a price tag that could cover a month of my pension. I looked at the monitors tracking my vital signs, watching my heart rate tick upward. "I never asked you to sell my home," I said quietly. "And I certainly never gave you permission to do so." Michael let out an exasperated sigh. "The thing is, Mom, we've already closed the deal. The buyers are a lovely young family, and they're planning to move in next month. You can't possibly maintain that place anyway, not with your health the way it is." I glanced at the military service photo on my nightstand. Me in full dress uniform, medals across my chest, standing proudly beside my helicopter. 22 years as an Army aviation mechanic and pilot, including being one of the first women to serve in certain combat support roles. I'd maintained Black Hawk helicopters in war zones. The suggestion that I couldn't handle a 3-bedroom craftsman with a garden felt not just insulting but erasing of everything I was. "Where exactly did you expect me to live after my recovery?" I asked, the question hanging in the air between us. Vanessa answered before Michael could open his mouth. "We've found a lovely assisted living community about 20 minutes from our house. Very modern, lots of activities." Her voice took on the artificially bright tone people use when describing accommodations to children or pets. "It's really perfect for someone at your stage of life." My stage of life? The words stung like a physical slap. I was only 63, active until this recent setback, and regularly volunteered teaching mechanical skills to underprivileged youth at the Veterans Center. Just last month, I'd helped Michael and Vanessa renovate their kitchen while they were on vacation in Europe. The same kitchen purchased with funds from my late husband's life insurance policy that I'd shared with them. I looked around the hospital, room at the get well cards from my veteran friends, the small flag my unit had carried in Afghanistan, the books on civil engineering I'd been studying for a community college course I was taking. None of these were the trappings of someone ready for assisted living. "I see," I said finally, my voice measured. "And when were you planning to consult me about these arrangements for my life?" The silence that followed my question was telling. Michael shifted uncomfortably at the foot of my bed, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the metal frame. Vanessa suddenly became fascinated with her manicure, examining her perfectly polished nails as if they might hold the answer to my inconvenient question. "Mom," Michael finally said, clearing his throat, "we thought it would be easier to present you with the completed arrangements. You've always hated making these kinds of decisions, and with your recovery to focus on—" "I've never hated making decisions," I interrupted, feeling a familiar tension building at my temples. "I've commanded teams in combat zones. I've made life and death decisions under fire. What I hate is having decisions made for me without my input." Michael glanced at Vanessa, who gave him a slight nod of encouragement. "The thing is, Mom, you're not getting any younger. Dad always handled the finances and household matters. We were just trying to take that burden off your shoulders." I stared at my son, momentarily speechless. His father and I had shared financial responsibilities throughout our 35-year marriage. Robert had managed the investments while I handled our day-to-day finances, bill payments, and property matters. Michael knew this. He'd seen me at the kitchen table countless times with papers spread out, calculating and organizing. "Your father and I were partners," I said carefully. "He never made major decisions without consulting me, nor I him. And I certainly never signed any power of attorney giving you authority to sell my home." "We have temporary medical power of attorney," Vanessa interjected. "From when you were in surgery. Michael's signature is perfectly legal on the house sale." I felt a cold sensation settle in my stomach. Yes, I had signed a temporary medical power of attorney before my operation, standard procedure, and Michael was my only child. But that document was limited to healthcare decisions if I was incapacitated, not broad authority over my assets. "A medical power of attorney doesn't cover real estate transactions," I responded, thanking heaven for the legal workshops the Veterans Association had offered. "And even if you somehow stretched its authority, it wouldn't cover the land. The land was never in the paperwork you had access to." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Michael's face. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, scanning it with increasing discomfort. "The buyers think they purchased the house and the land it sits on," he said, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "That's what the listing agent advertised." "Then the listing agent made a serious error," I replied. "You can sell what you own, Michael. The house was in your father's name, and as his heir, you had a claim to it. But the land has always been in my name only, held separately. It was never yours to sell." Vanessa's composure cracked slightly. "This is ridiculous. Property doesn't work that way. You can't sell a house without the land beneath it." "Actually, you can," I said. "It's uncommon in residential properties, but perfectly legal. It's called a ground lease situation." The years I'd spent studying local zoning and property laws after retirement weren't just a hobby. They were preparation for eventually developing that land for additional retirement income. The hospital room door opened, and my nurse, Diane, entered with my afternoon medication. She paused, sensing the tension, but proceeded professionally to check my vitals and adjust my IV. "Everything okay in here, Mrs. Winters?" she asked, giving me a concerned look. Diane was around my age, and we'd bonded over both being veterans. She'd served as a Navy nurse during Desert Storm. "Just a family discussion about my living arrangements," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Diane's eyes narrowed slightly as she took in Michael and Vanessa's expensive clothes, and then glanced at my modest hospital belongings. "Your blood pressure's elevated. Perhaps this conversation should continue when you're stronger," she suggested. the protective tone in her voice unmistakable. "We were just leaving anyway," Vanessa said quickly, tugging at Michael's sleeve. "We need to pick up the kids from soccer practice." Michael hesitated, then nodded. "We'll figure this out, Mom. Don't worry about anything right now. Just focus on getting better." As they turned to leave, I called out, "Michael." He paused at the doorway, looking back. "I'd like copies of all the sale documents sent to me. And please contact my lockbox at First Federal. The key is in my desk at home." I stopped myself. "In my desk at what used to be home. I need those land documents brought to me as soon as possible." After they left, Diane adjusted my pillows and gave me a knowing look. "Family thinking they know what's best for you?" I nodded, suddenly feeling exhausted. "My son sold my house while I was having surgery, without my permission." Diane's eyebrows shot up. "He did what now?" "Sold my house. For my own good, apparently." I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "But he doesn't know I still own the land under it. My father left it to me before I was even married." A slow smile spread across Diane's face. "Well now, that's going to be interesting, isn't it?" She patted my hand. "Don't you worry. I've seen all kinds of family situations in this job. The ones who try to rush elderly parents into facilities and sell off their assets are usually the ones most shocked when those elderly parents turn out to have a few tricks up their sleeves." I smiled weakly at Diane, appreciating her support, but feeling the weight of betrayal settling heavy on my chest. 50 years in mechanical engineering and aviation, and my son thinks I can't make decisions about my own property. I glanced down at my hands, still strong despite the IV taped to my left wrist, calluses from decades of work clearly visible. "You know what they say," Diane said, adjusting my medication drip. "Never underestimate a woman who's survived military service. We've faced worse than entitled children." Before she left the room, Diane paused at the door. "You should let your doctor know about this situation. Dr. Patel might want to delay your discharge if you don't have stable housing to return to." The truth of her words hit me. Where would I go? The home that had been mine for 35 years, where Robert and I had raised Michael, where I'd planted the rose garden that had won community awards 3 years running, where all my tools and belongings still resided, was being handed over to strangers. Where are you watching from today? If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow I'm sharing something extraordinary that will leave you speechless. The afternoon passed slowly, punctuated by vital sign checks and a brief visit from Dr. Patel. I didn't mention the housing situation, not ready to face the potential delay in my discharge. Instead, I used the hospital phone to call my old friend Eleanor, who had served with me in my first deployment. "He did what?" Eleanor's voice crackled through the receiver, her outrage palpable even over the poor connection. "Julia, that's elder abuse, financial exploitation. You need to call Veterans Legal Services immediately." "I'm not sure I want to go that route yet," I replied, watching the autumn sunlight create patterns on the hospital room wall. "He's still my son, Ellie, and you're still his mother, which should have prevented him from selling your home out from under you while you were unconscious," Eleanor shot back. "If Brandon ever pulled something like that with me, he'd be writing his apologies with the pen stuck between the fingers of his broken hand." Despite everything, I laughed. Eleanor had always been fierce, protective of those she considered family. We'd seen each other through deployments, divorces, and the challenges of being women in male-dominated military spaces. After retirement, she'd become a volunteer advocate for veterans' rights. "Listen," she continued, her voice softening slightly, "I can be there tomorrow morning. I'll bring Bill from Veterans Legal Services. No obligation, just to know your options. And I'll swing by the bank, pick up those land documents for you." "What's the key situation?" I explained about the desk key and the lockbox, feeling a rush of gratitude for Eleanor's practical approach. "No pity, just problem-solving, the military way." "Consider it handled," she said firmly. "Now, any idea what the buyers paid for your property?" I hadn't even considered that aspect. No, Michael didn't mention figures. Well, your place is in Oak Ridge, right? On that corner lot with the big sycamore? Property values there have tripled in the last decade. If it sold at market value, we're talking serious money. The thought stopped me cold. Where was that money? If Michael had truly sold the house to cover my medical expenses, shouldn't he have mentioned the hospital bills being paid? And if there was money left over, why push me toward assisted living rather than helping me find another suitable home? After hanging up with Eleanor, I lay back against the pillows, my mind racing. I reached for my personal items bag and pulled out my phone, grateful that I'd taught myself to navigate technology despite Michael's insistence that women of my generation struggled with such things. I opened the property tax website for our county and searched for my address. What I found made my blood pressure spike enough to set off the monitor alarm. My property, both house and land, had been last assessed at $780,000. Given the market trends Eleanor mentioned, it could have sold for close to $1 million. My medical bills, even with the complications, wouldn't exceed $50,000 after my military insurance coverage. The nurse who responded to the alarm gave me a concerned look. "Everything okay, Mrs. Winters?" I nodded, taking deep breaths to calm myself. "Just saw something surprising on my phone." When she left, I continued my digital investigation. I looked up my son's social media accounts, something I rarely did. There, posted just 1 week after my surgery, were photos of Michael and Vanessa standing in front of a luxury car dealership beside a gleaming new SUV with a red bow on it. The caption read, "Finally upgraded Vanessa's mom mobile to something more worthy of her style. Blessed the level up." The timestamp showed it was posted the same day I was moved from the ICU to the regular hospital floor, the same day Michael would have signed the house sale papers. My hands shook as I set the phone down. I'd given Michael and Vanessa money for their wedding, helped with the down payment on their first house, contributed to private school tuition for my grandchildren. When Robert passed 5 years ago, I'd given Michael half of the life insurance payout immediately, though I was the sole beneficiary. I'd never asked for anything in return except respect and honesty. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound I'd sustained. But beneath the hurt, something else was kindling. A slow-burning anger that felt almost unfamiliar. In the military, I'd learned to channel emotion into strategic thinking. Now, looking at the evidence of my son's deception, I felt that old training kick in. This wasn't just about hurt feelings. This was about justice, accountability, and yes, perhaps even a measure of retribution. The night passed fitfully, my sleep interrupted by vital checks and the persistent ache in my hip where they'd repaired the old shrapnel damage. But it wasn't just physical discomfort keeping me awake. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael and Vanessa standing beside that luxury SUV, smiling broadly while I lay in a hospital bed, unaware they were liquidating my home. Morning brought a gentle knock at my door, and Eleanor appeared, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in her signature practical bun. In her Army days, she'd been known for her no-nonsense efficiency, and retirement hadn't softened that quality one bit. "You look terrible," she announced, setting a paper coffee cup on my tray table and placing a leather messenger bag on the white visitor's chair. "Good to see you too, Chief," I replied, using her old rank with affection. Eleanor had retired as a chief warrant officer, and the title still suited her commanding presence. "I've been busy," she said, pulling documents from her bag. "First, I got your land records." She held up a folder with the bank's logo. "The branch manager remembered you. Said to tell you the rose cuttings you gave her last year are thriving." I smiled despite everything. My heritage roses had been my pride and joy, cultivated over decades in the garden that was now sold to strangers. "Second," Eleanor continued, "I called Bill, but he can't make it until tomorrow. In the meantime, he sent some preliminary information. She placed another folder on my bed. And third, I did some reconnaissance. Reconnaissance? I raised an eyebrow. I drove by your house. Figured we should know what we're dealing with. Eleanor pulled out her phone and showed me photos. No moving trucks yet, but there's a sold sign on the lawn with Vanessa's face on it. Did you know your daughter-in-law got her real estate license last year? I hadn't known. The revelation sent a new wave of betrayal washing over me. Vanessa had sold my house herself, which meant she'd earned a commission on the sale. My home had become her payday. There's more, Eleanor said, her expression darkening. I stopped by Michael and Vanessa's place. Didn't go in, just drove past slowly. There's construction happening. Looks like they're putting in a pool. The monitor beside my bed beeped as my heart rate increased. A pool. My son had always wanted one, but I'd refused to install one in our backyard, preferring my gardens. Now, with what was almost certainly my house money, he was building the pool I'd denied him, while planning to move me into an assisted living facility. Julia, Eleanor said, taking my hand, you need to decide how you want to handle this. Bill says you have options. The medical power of attorney doesn't cover property sales, especially not property that wasn't included in your husband's estate. At minimum, you could invalidate the sale of the land, which makes the house sale complicated for the buyers. I stared out the window, watching birds gather on the hospital lawn. The military had taught me to be strategic, to assess situations before acting. Emotional reactions led to mistakes in the field. What exactly did the land documents show? I asked, reaching for the folder. Eleanor handed it over. The property was originally one parcel belonging to your father. When he transferred the land to you in 1975, it remained a single property. But in 1998, you filed to split the parcel into two separate legal entities, the house on one, the surrounding land on another. The house parcel is tiny, just the footprint of the building. The land parcel includes everything else, the yard, the driveway, even the garden. I nodded slowly, memories surfacing. Robert and I did that for estate planning purposes. His first wife had contentious family members making claims on his assets, so we kept things separate. I'd forgotten the details. Well, it's a good thing. You did it, Eleanor said. Because according to these records, while Robert's will left the house to Michael upon your death, the land remains solely in your name, with no stipulations about inheritance. The implications were starting to become clear. So Michael sold a house that's basically floating on my land. Exactly. And unless there was a ground lease agreement established, which there wasn't, the new owners have a serious problem. Eleanor's smile was sharp. They own a structure with no legal right to the land it occupies. Dr. Patel arrived then, clipboard in hand, interrupting our conversation. After examining my surgical site and reviewing my charts, she delivered unexpected news. You're healing remarkably well, Mrs. Winters. Military personnel always make the best patients. You follow instructions and don't complain. She smiled. I think we can discharge you tomorrow, provided you have suitable accommodations for recovery. I exchanged glances with Eleanor, who stepped forward smoothly. She'll be staying with me, Doctor. I've already prepared my guest room. It's all on one level, and I've arranged for a home health nurse to check in daily. Dr. Patel nodded, satisfied. Excellent. I'll start the paperwork. After she left, I turned to Eleanor with surprise. Your guest room? Since when am I staying? With you? Since your son sold your house while you were unconscious, Eleanor replied matter-of-factly. My place isn't fancy, but it's accessible, and I've got that fold-out couch that won't kill your back. Plus, I'm 5 minutes from the VA center if you need follow-up care. Tears pricked at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. In the military, we were trained to handle crises, to adapt and overcome. But there was something about Eleanor's straightforward generosity that broke through my defenses. I don't know what to say, I managed. Say nothing. We went through 3 deployments together. You pulled me out of that collapsed barracks in Kandahar. This is nothing. She squeezed my hand. Besides, it's only temporary. Once we sort out this land situation, you'll have options. As Eleanor organized my belongings and made calls to arrange my discharge, a plan began forming in my mind. Michael had underestimated me, assumed I was too weak, too compliant, or too medicated to fight back. He'd forgotten that before I was his mother, I was a soldier, and soldiers never surrender their ground without a battle. You just missed them, Diane informed me the next morning as she helped me pack my few hospital belongings. Your son and his wife stopped by during shift change. When I told them you were being discharged today, they seemed surprised. I bet they were, I said, carefully folding the flannel pajamas Eleanor had brought me. Did they leave a message? Just that they'd call you later about the arrangements they've made. Diane made air quotes around arrangements, her disapproval evident. I mentioned you'd be staying with a friend during recovery, and your daughter-in-law said something about that being temporary until your assisted living apartment was ready. My jaw tightened. They were still proceeding as if my future had been decided, as if my opinion was merely an inconvenient obstacle to their plans. Did they happen to bring the documents I requested? I asked, already knowing the answer. Diane shook her head. Not that they mentioned to me. Eleanor arrived shortly after, bringing a wheelchair from her car, though the hospital would have provided one. Military surplus, she explained with a wink. More comfortable than those hospital torture devices. The discharge process took longer than expected, with last-minute prescription adjustments and care instructions. By the time we were driving away from the hospital, the autumn afternoon was fading into evening, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Bill will meet us at my place tomorrow morning, Eleanor said as she navigated through light traffic. He's bringing someone from the county assessor's office who can verify the property boundaries. Apparently, there's been a rash of cases like yours. Family members making unauthorized property sales while relatives are hospitalized. Really? I hadn't considered that my situation might be part of a larger pattern. Unfortunately, yes. The aging veteran population is a target. Many lived frugal lives, paid off their homes decades ago, and now those properties are worth small fortunes in today's market. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Bill says some children can't wait for inheritance. They see their parents' assets as their own future windfalls and get impatient. The thought that my case might be just one among many was both disturbing and oddly comforting. At least there were systems in place to address such situations. We drove through familiar neighborhoods, and I felt a pang as we passed the turn that would have led to my home. I'd lived in that house since 1985, raised my son there, tended my gardens through seasons of drought and plenty, celebrated holidays and mourned losses, including Robert's death, within those walls. We could drive by if you want, Eleanor offered. Noticing my gaze lingering on the street sign, I shook my head. Not yet. I need to be stronger for that confrontation. Eleanor's home was a modest, ranch-style house in a quiet neighborhood popular with veterans. Many of the homes displayed small, military service flags or branch insignias. Her place was neat but lived in, with practical furniture and walls adorned with photos from her service years alongside vibrant paintings she'd created in retirement. The guest room is through here, she said, helping me navigate with my temporary walker. I put in those grab bars we got from the VA surplus last year. Figured they'd come in handy. The room was simply furnished but thoughtfully prepared. A hospital-grade wedge pillow sat on the bed, perfect for elevating my leg. A small table beside it held a lamp, a carafe of water, and a neatly arranged row of my medication bottles. On the dresser stood several framed photos, one of me and Eleanor in uniform beside a helicopter, another of Robert and me on our 30th anniversary, and a third showing Michael's high school graduation, all three of us smiling proudly, seeing. That last photo sent a fresh wave of pain through me that had nothing to do with my surgical site. I thought you might want these nearby, Eleanor said, following my gaze to the photos. To remember who you are and where you've been. I nodded, unable to speak past the sudden lump in my throat. After helping me settle in, Eleanor brought a light dinner on trays, and we ate in the living room while watching the evening news. It felt surreal. This ordinary routine in the midst of such extraordinary circumstances. But the military had taught us both to maintain normalcy even in crisis, to find stability wherever possible. As we finished eating, my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. "Want me to give you privacy?" Eleanor asked. I shook my head. "No need. Put it on speaker." I pressed the answer button. "Hello, Michael." "Mom?" His voice sounded tense. "Where are you? We went to the hospital to help. With your discharge, but they said you'd already left with someone. I'm staying with Eleanor Williams. You remember her. She served with me in Afghanistan." "The sergeant with all the tattoos?" His tone conveyed disapproval. Eleanor, whose forearms bore inked tributes to fallen comrades, raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. "Chief Warrant Officer Williams," I corrected firmly. "And yes, she's kindly offered me her guest room during my recovery." "That's unnecessary, Mom. We've already put a deposit on your apartment at Sunny Pines. It's all arranged. First floor unit, weekly housekeeping included. They can even provide physical therapy on site." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Michael, I never agreed to move to Sunny Pines or any other facility. I didn't agree to sell my house. You made those decisions without my consent while I was undergoing surgery." "Mom, we've been over this. It was the practical solution. You can't live alone anymore, not with your health issues." "My health issues are a repaired service injury, not dementia. I was living independently before surgery, and I'll do so again." There was a pause. Then Vanessa's voice came on the line. She must have been listening all along. "Julia, be reasonable. The house is sold. The papers are signed. The new family moves in next month. There's no going back, so you might as well embrace this new chapter." Eleanor made a slicing motion across her throat, signaling me to end the call, but I wasn't finished. "Actually, Vanessa, there's a significant problem with those papers you signed. You sold the house, but not the land it stands on. I still own that." The silence that followed was deeply satisfying. "That's absurd," Vanessa finally sputtered, her composed realtor persona cracking. "The land and house are the same property. You can't separate them." "Actually, you can," I replied calmly. "And my father did, back in 1975. I own the land separately, from the house. It's on a different deed entirely." "I don't believe you," Michael cut in. "Dad would have mentioned something that important. Your father knew perfectly well. We set it up that way for estate planning purposes when you were still in elementary school." I shifted on the couch, adjusting my position to ease the ache in my hip. "The paperwork is quite clear. Eleanor picked up the documents from my safety deposit box yesterday. Would you like her to scan and email them to you?" Another silence. Longer this time. I could almost hear the wheels turning in Michael's head. "This doesn't change anything," he finally said, his voice strained with forced confidence. "We still need to move forward with the assisted living arrangements. We can figure out the land issue separately." "No, Michael," I said firmly. "We will not be moving forward with any arrangements you've made without my consent. And the land issue changes everything. You sold a house that now has no legal right to occupy the ground it sits on. That's a serious problem for the buyers." "The buyers signed a standard contract," Vanessa interjected. "They purchased the property as described in the listing." "And how exactly did you describe it?" I asked. "Did you specify that the sale included only the structure and not the land beneath it? Did you disclose that the land was owned separately? Because if not, you may have committed real estate fraud, Vanessa." Eleanor gave me a thumbs up, grinning widely. She'd always appreciated a well-executed tactical strike. "This is ridiculous," Vanessa snapped. "You're just trying to be difficult because you're angry we made decisions while you were in surgery. Decisions that needed to be made, I might add. What I'm doing, I said, my voice hardening, is asserting my legal rights to property that belongs to me. Property that was never yours to sell. Now, I have a few questions about the sale that I expect honest answers to. First, what was the selling price? Michael cleared his throat uncomfortably. The house sold for $985,000. Nearly $1 million. The figure hung in the air between us. My modest craftsman home, purchased for $127,000 in 1985, had appreciated beyond anything I'd imagined. And the proceeds? I pressed. You said the sale was to cover my medical expenses. My total out-of-pocket costs after military insurance won't exceed $50,000. That leaves over $900,000 unaccounted for. Well, there were the realtor fees, Michael began. Which went to Vanessa, I interrupted. What about the rest? We've established a trust, he said after a pause, for your ongoing care and expenses. A trust, I repeated flatly. Controlled by whom? His silence was answer enough. Let me guess, I continued. You're the trustee, with full discretionary control over the funds. Funds that legally belong to me, from the sale of a house you had no authority to sell, sitting on land that still belongs to me. Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion, Michael said, his tone shifting to the patronizing one he'd adopted recently when speaking to me. Everything we've done has been for your benefit. We're trying to secure your future. By purchasing a new SUV the same day you signed the house sale papers? The words came out before I could stop them. That seems an interesting way to secure my future. You've been spying on us? Vanessa's outrage was immediate. Checking your public social media posts is hardly spying, Vanessa. You're the one who shared photos of your new vehicle with the caption about finally upgrading to something worthy of your style. Purchased, coincidentally, the exact day my house was sold. Eleanor raised both eyebrows, impressed by this revelation. That car was partially paid for with our own savings, Michael protested weakly. Money we'd been setting aside. And partially paid for with what? I asked. A conveniently timed cash infusion from my house sale, perhaps? This conversation isn't productive, Vanessa cut in sharply. You're clearly upset and not thinking rationally. We should continue this discussion when you're calmer. I'm perfectly calm, I replied, and thinking very rationally. Here's what's going to happen next. Tomorrow morning, Eleanor and I are meeting with a veterans legal aid attorney and a county assessor. We'll be reviewing all documents related to the property sale, including whatever trust you claim to have established. I'll need complete copies of everything sent to Eleanor's address by noon tomorrow. Mom, Michael began, but I cut him off. I'm not finished. After reviewing the documents, we'll determine next steps. But I want to be perfectly clear about one thing. I will not be moving into Sunny Pines or any other facility of your choosing. I will not be turning control of my assets over to you. And I will not allow you to dismiss me as confused or irrational because I'm standing up for myself. The line went quiet again. Then Michael said, his voice tight, You don't have to be so dramatic about this. We're your family. We're trying to help. Family doesn't sell someone's home without their knowledge or consent, I said quietly. Family doesn't make life-altering decisions for a competent adult who's temporarily vulnerable. That's not help, Michael. That's exploitation. You've clearly made up your mind about us, Vanessa said coldly. Perhaps we should continue this conversation with our attorney present as well. By all means, I replied. Bring legal representation. I welcome the clarity that we'll provide. After they hung up, Eleanor let out a low whistle. Remind me never to get on your bad side, Julia. That was a tactical masterclass. I slumped back against the couch cushions, suddenly exhausted. The conversation had drained what little energy my recovery had restored. I never thought I'd be in this position, I said softly. Fighting my own son for control of my life. Eleanor, poured 2 small glasses of her treasured bourbon, handing one to me. "You're not just fighting for control of your life," she said. "You're fighting for justice. And that's something neither of us has ever backed down from." I took a small sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. She was right. This wasn't just about a house or land or money. This was about dignity, respect, and the right to self-determination. Values I'd fought to defend throughout my military career. I would not surrender them now, not even to my own child. Bill Roberts arrived at Eleanor's house early the next morning, carrying a worn leather briefcase that had clearly seen years of service. A compact man with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he had the focused demeanor of someone who'd seen every possible variation of family conflict and remained unruffled by all of them. "Mrs. Winters," he said, shaking my hand firmly, as Eleanor helped me settle at the kitchen table. "I've reviewed your case preliminarily. You've got one of the clearest examples of unauthorized property transfer I've seen in my 15 years with Veterans Legal Services. Please call me Julia," I said, gesturing for him to take a seat. "And thank you for coming on such short notice." "Veterans take priority," he replied simply, opening his briefcase and extracting several folders. "I've brought Patricia Torres from the county assessor's office to verify the property divisions. She's waiting in the car, finishing a call. Should join us momentarily." Eleanor set coffee mugs in front of us. "Julia's son and daughter-in-law called last night. They're bringing their own attorney to the next discussion." Bill nodded, unsurprised. "Standard intimidation tactic. They're hoping you'll back down when faced with legal representation. They don't realize you have the stronger position." He spread several documents on the table. "I've pulled the original property records. Your father's land transfer to you in 1975 is crystal clear. The subsequent parcel division in 1998 is equally well documented. You own the land, separate from the house structure. There's no ambiguity there." "Can they claim the medical power of attorney gave Michael authority to sell the house?" I asked, the question that had been troubling me through a restless night. Bill shook his head decisively. "Absolutely not. I've reviewed the document you signed before surgery. It's a standard healthcare proxy form, authorizing medical decisions only. It contains no financial powers whatsoever. Even if it did, it wouldn't extend to real estate that wasn't explicitly included." A knock at the door announced Patricia Torres, a brisk woman in her 50s carrying a tablet and rolled maps. After introductions, she spread a detailed property map across Eleanor's kitchen table. "The situation is unusual but not unprecedented," she explained, tracing boundaries with a professional finger. "Your property was legally divided into 2 parcels. Parcel A is the building footprint only, essentially the foundation and physical structure. Parcel B is the surrounding land, including the gardens, driveway, and all outdoor areas." She looked up at me. "The most recent deed transfer shows Parcel A, the house, being sold to the buyers, but no corresponding transfer of Parcel B. You are still the legal owner of the land." "What does this mean for the house buyers?" Eleanor asked, refilling coffee. Mugs as we talked. Patricia's expression turned serious. "It creates a significant problem for them. Without rights to the land, they own a structure they can't legally access. They can't use the driveway, can't walk on the lawn, can't even enter the front door without trespassing on Mrs. Winters' property. Unless I grant an easement or ground lease," I added, remembering terms from my property law self-education. "Exactly," Bill confirmed, "which gives you considerable leverage in addressing this situation." Patricia continued. "The failure to disclose this arrangement to the buyers could constitute fraud, particularly if your son and daughter-in-law knew or should have known about the separate parcels." "Vanessa is a licensed realtor," I said quietly. "She handled the sale herself." Bill and Patricia exchanged significant glances. "That complicates things for them considerably," Bill noted. "As a licensed professional, she had a duty to verify all aspects of the title. If she failed to do so, or worse, knew and concealed it, she could face disciplinary action from the Real Estate Commission in addition to civil liability. The doorbell rang, interrupting our discussion. Eleanor went to answer it, returning moments later with a large envelope. "Special delivery," she announced, "from Michael and Vanessa's attorney." I opened the envelope, finding copies of the house sale documents, along with papers establishing a trust entitled Julia Winters Care Trust, with Michael listed as trustee. The trust document granted him broad powers over the funds and explicitly stated that distributions were at the trustee's sole discretion. Bill reviewed the papers, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "This trust agreement is problematic on multiple levels. It's dated during your hospitalization, when you were under anesthesia. There's no indication you were consulted or consented. It grants sweeping powers with minimal oversight." He looked up, his eyes serious behind his glasses. "Julia, if you'd signed this, which thankfully you didn't, you would have effectively surrendered control of nearly all your assets to your son." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. This went beyond selling my house without permission. Had I not discovered the land ownership issue, had I been more compliant or confused after surgery, I might have found myself completely dependent on Michael's discretion for everything from housing to spending money. "There's more," Bill continued, examining the trust documents more closely. "The trust provides for your care and maintenance, but establishes strict conditions. You would have been required to reside in an approved facility, selected by the trustee, and any independent living arrangement would have required Michael's written permission." "It's a control mechanism," Eleanor said bluntly, looking over his shoulder at the documents. "Designed to keep you dependent and compliant." I stared at the papers spread across the table, evidence of my son's betrayal laid out in black and white legal terminology. The house where Michael had grown up, where I'd nursed him through childhood illnesses, helped him with homework, celebrated his achievements. He had sold it out from under me while I was at my most vulnerable, then attempted to place me in a controlled environment while he assumed authority over my finances. I thought of the new SUV in his driveway, the pool construction Eleanor had observed. The pieces fit together with nauseating clarity. "What are my options?" I asked Bill, my voice steadier than I expected given the emotions churning inside me. "Several," he replied, closing the trust document with evident distaste. "First, we can challenge the house sale as unauthorized. Even without the land issue, selling your primary residence while you were under anesthesia, using a medical power of attorney that granted no financial authority, is legally questionable at best." "Would that put the buyers in a difficult position?" I asked, concerned despite everything. "They may be innocent in all this." Bill nodded, appreciating my consideration. "It could. However, they would have recourse against your son and daughter-in-law for misrepresentation. Alternatively, we could leverage the land ownership to negotiate a resolution." "What kind of resolution?" "You could offer to sell the land to the buyers directly, essentially completing the transaction properly. That would validate their purchase while ensuring you, not your son, receive the proceeds." "Or," Patricia interjected, "you could negotiate a long-term ground lease, giving them the right to occupy the land for a fee, while you retain ownership. Both options would provide me with either a lump sum or ongoing income, funds that would remain under my control, not Michael's. I could find my own housing, make my own decisions, maintain my independence. There's also the question of the money already received from the house sale," Bill added. "Those funds belong to you, not your son. We can demand a full accounting and transfer of all proceeds to an account in your name only." I took a deep breath, considering the path forward. "Let me think about this overnight. This isn't just a legal issue, it's my family, my son. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and attempted exploitation, Michael was still my child, still the baby I'd carried, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd been proud of for so many years. Where had we gone so wrong? Of course, Bill agreed, gathering his documents. Take the time you need. But Julia, he added, his expression softening slightly, protecting yourself isn't the same as punishing your son. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those we love is to establish firm boundaries. That night, sleep eluded me again. I lay awake in Eleanor's guest room, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying decades of memories with Michael. His first steps, wobbling across our living room floor toward my outstretched arms. His high school graduation, standing proud in his cap and gown while Robert snapped endless photos. The day he married Vanessa, handsome in his tuxedo, promising to build a life based on love and respect. Where had that respectful young man gone? When had he started seeing me as an inconvenience, an obstacle, a resource to be managed rather than a person to be honored? The easy answer would be to blame Vanessa, her expensive tastes, her social climbing ambitions, her thinly veiled impatience. With me. But that absolved Michael of responsibility, and the truth was more complicated. The seeds had been planted long before Vanessa entered our lives. Perhaps it began after Robert died. My husband had always been the buffer between Michael's impulsiveness and my practicality. Without Robert's mediating presence, the differences in our approaches to life became more pronounced. Michael wanted quick solutions and immediate gratification. I valued careful consideration and sustainable choices, or perhaps it went back further, to how Robert and I had raised him. Had we given too much? Protected him from consequences? Failed to instill the values of sacrifice and service that had shaped our own lives? By morning, I was exhausted, but resolved. After a quiet breakfast with Eleanor, I called Bill to outline my decision. I want to meet with Michael and Vanessa in person, I told him. With you present, of course. I need to look my son in the eye while we discuss this. Bill agreed to arrange the meeting at his office for that afternoon. What outcome are you seeking? He asked, his tone professional but gentle. Justice, I replied after a moment's consideration. Not revenge, not punishment, just a restoration of what's rightfully mine and the freedom to make my own choices going forward. The Veterans Legal Services Office occupied a modest suite in a converted Victorian house. Bill had arranged for us to use the main conference room, a space with worn but dignified furniture, and walls lined with photographs of military personnel from different eras. I arrived early with Eleanor, settling myself at the table with my cane propped beside me, a visual reminder of my current physical vulnerability that contrasted with the strength of my legal position. Michael and Vanessa arrived precisely on time, accompanied by a sleek man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Lawrence Thornton, their attorney. Vanessa was impeccably dressed as always, her expression carefully neutral. Michael looked tired, with shadows under his eyes and a tension in his jaw that reminded me painfully of Robert whenever he was struggling with a difficult decision. Thank you for coming, I began, once everyone was seated. We're here to resolve this situation amicably, Thornton interjected smoothly before Michael or Vanessa could speak. My clients are concerned about your well-being and want to ensure your needs are properly addressed while minimizing any unnecessary complications. By unnecessary complications, do you mean my objection to having my home sold without my knowledge or consent while I was recovering from surgery? I asked, my voice level despite the anger simmering beneath. Thornton's professional smile didn't waver. Mrs. Winters, medical events often necessitate rapid decisions by family members. My clients acted in what they believed was your best interest, creating a structured arrangement to provide for your care in the most appropriate setting. Mr. Thornton, Bill countered, your characterization omits several critical facts. The medical power of attorney signed by my client provided no authority for financial decisions or property sales. Furthermore, the creation of a trust pudding, nearly $1 million under Michael Winters' control, with no input from Mrs. Winters herself, raises serious concerns about the intent behind these actions. I watched Michael's face as Bill spoke. A muscle twitched in his cheek, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. Vanessa, however, maintained her composed facade, her manicured fingers lightly tapping the table. The fact remains, Thornton continued, that the house has been sold, the papers are signed, earnest money exchanged, and the new owners expect possession next month. Unwinding that transaction would cause considerable distress to innocent third parties. I have no desire to cause distress to the buyers, I said, drawing everyone's attention back to me. But, as I believe you're now aware, they've purchased a house without rights to the land it sits on. That presents a significant problem that needs addressing. Thornton's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. A technical issue that can be resolved with the appropriate easements or transfers. Indeed it can, I agreed, which brings us to the purpose of this meeting. I folded my hands on the table, looking directly at Michael for the first time. I want to understand why you did this. Michael, not the legal justifications or the practical rationalizations, the real reason. Why did you sell my home without telling me? Michael shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his attorney, who gave a slight nod. Mom, you're getting older. After your fall last winter and then this service injury flaring up, it became clear you couldn't manage that big house anymore. The stairs, the yard work, it was too much. We saw an opportunity to solve multiple problems at once. What problems? Exactly? I pressed. He hesitated. Your long-term care needs, the house maintenance, the financial situation. What financial situation? I have my military pension, Robert's pension, our investments, and a paid-off house. I was financially secure. But the future, he began. The future what, Michael? The future where you might have to wait decades more for your inheritance? The future where my medical needs might consume the assets you've been counting on receiving someday? A flush crept up his neck. That's unfair. We were thinking of your needs, your comfort. My comfort, I repeated flatly. Is that why you were building a swimming pool the day after selling my house? For my comfort? Vanessa interjected, her voice sharp. That pool has nothing to do with this. We've been planning it for years. Yet, you only began construction the day after receiving funds from my house sale, I noted. An interesting coincidence. We had the money set aside, she insisted. The timing was just convenient. Like the timing of your new luxury SUV, I asked, watching her eyes widen slightly. Also purchased the day the house sale closed? Mrs. Winters, Thornton cut in. These personal expenditures are irrelevant to the matter at hand. Let's focus on finding a solution that addresses everyone's concerns. They're not irrelevant, I countered. They speak to intent. But you're right about one thing. We need a solution. I nodded to Bill, who opened his briefcase and distributed copies of a document to everyone at the table. This is my proposal, I explained as they reviewed the papers. I will grant an easement to the home buyers, allowing them legal access to and use of the land, in exchange for direct payment to me of fair market value for those rights. Additionally, all proceeds from the house sale will be transferred immediately to an account in my name only, with the trust agreement nullified. Michael looked up from the document, his expression a mixture of relief and wariness. You're not going to try to reverse the house sale? No. The buyers did nothing wrong. They shouldn't suffer for your actions. And where will you live? He asked, his voice softer than it had been in our recent interactions. That's no longer your concern, I replied, maintaining a steady gaze. I'll make my own arrangements with my own funds. Vanessa frowned. You can't possibly mean to live independently again. Not after this surgery. Not at your age. My age? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. I'm 63, Vanessa. Plenty of people my age and older live independently. I commanded helicopter, maintenance crews in combat zones. I think I can manage a thermostat and a microwave. There are other considerations in the proposal. Bill interjected smoothly, directing everyone's attention back to the documents. Mrs. Winters expects a full accounting of all funds received from the sale, including the commission. She also requests the return of all personal items from the house, furniture, photos, military memorabilia, and garden equipment, before the new owners take possession. Thornton reviewed the proposal with a professional eye. The terms seem reasonable, though we'd need to work out the specific valuation of the land rights. He glanced at Michael and Vanessa. I'd advise moving forward with this framework. Michael seemed deflated, the fight gone out of him. What about your ongoing care? Your follow-up appointments? I have the VA, I replied, and friends who understand the meaning of respect. I didn't look at Eleanor, but I felt her quiet support from the chair beside me. And us? Michael asked, his voice unexpectedly vulnerable. What about your relationship with us, with the kids? The question caught me off guard. In all my strategic planning, in all my focus on reclaiming my assets and independence, I hadn't fully addressed the emotional aftermath. What did I want? My relationship with my son-to-be moving forward? Could we rebuild what had been broken, or was the damage too severe? That, I said finally, will depend on actions, not words, on demonstrated respect, not promises, on recognizing that I am still the woman who raised you, who taught you right from wrong, who deserves to be treated as a capable adult making her own choices, not as a problem to be managed or an asset to be liquidated. The meeting concluded, with tentative agreements and promises of further documentation. Thornton shepherded Michael and Vanessa out quickly after the main points were settled, perhaps sensing that more conversation would only open deeper wounds. As the door closed behind them, I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the confrontation in my bones. You did well, Bill said, gathering his papers. Firm but fair. We should have the formal agreements drawn up within a few days. Eleanor squeezed my shoulder gently. Ready to head out? You look like you could use some rest. I nodded, suddenly exhausted. The emotional toll had exacerbated my physical fatigue, making my surgical site throb and my muscles ache. As Eleanor helped me to her car, I caught a glimpse of Michael and Vanessa in the parking lot, engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation beside their vehicle. Michael glanced up, meeting my eyes briefly before looking away. The drive back to Eleanor's was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. It wasn't until we were settled in her living room with mugs of tea that she broke the silence. What are you thinking for your next move? Housing-wise, I mean. I cradled the warm mug in my hands, considering. I've been thinking about that a lot. Using the land value and house proceeds, I could buy something smaller. Maybe one of those new single-level homes in the veterans community out by Riverside. Eleanor nodded. Those are nice. Built with accessibility in mind, good community spaces. But, I continued, a new idea taking shape as I spoke. I'm also considering something more significant. Significant how? I set my tea down, energy returning with my vision. My father left me that land for a reason. He always said it was prime real estate, that someday it would be worth far more than anyone imagined. What if, instead of just selling the access rights to the current house buyers, I developed the remaining property? Eleanor's eyebrows rose. Developed it? Like building something new? Exactly. The property is almost an acre, with just the house sitting on a small portion. County zoning would allow for multiple units on that land. The idea had been percolating since my conversation with Patricia from the assessor's office, who had mentioned changing zoning regulations in my neighborhood allowing for higher density housing. What kind of units are you thinking? Accessible. Housing for veterans, I said, the concept crystallizing as I articulated it. Small, well-designed units specifically adapted for service members with disabilities. The kind of place I wished existed when Maria Jenkins from my unit came home with her mobility impaired after that IED in Kandahar, or when Sam Lowenstein, Needed a place that could accommodate his service dog and oxygen equipment. Eleanor stared at me, a slow smile spreading across her face. Julia Winters, you magnificent strategist. You're not just solving your own housing problem, you're creating a legacy. It's something I've thought about for years, I admitted. Robert and I used to discuss it sometimes, especially after we'd visit VA facilities and see the housing challenges our fellow veterans faced. We'd sketch out designs, imagine little cottages with wide doorways and zero-step entries, communal gardens that could be tended from a wheelchair. The grant possibilities would be substantial, Eleanor said, her mind clearly racing ahead. Between VA programs, disability advocacy groups, and veterans organizations, there's real funding potential, and you already own the land outright. I'd need to manage the house buyers carefully, I acknowledged. Ensure they understand that while they'll have guaranteed access to their property, there will eventually be construction and new neighbors. Given the alternative, buying a house with no legal right to the land it sits on, I imagine they'll be amenable to negotiation, Eleanor reasoned, especially if the development is tastefully designed and serves a noble purpose. We spent the rest of the evening brainstorming, the initial idea expanding and taking form. Eleanor pulled out her laptop, showing me similar projects in other states, connecting me with veterans housing advocates she knew through her volunteer work. By bedtime, what had begun as a vague concept had evolved into a genuine possibility. 3 days later, the formal agreements were ready to sign. Bill had negotiated fair market value for the land access rights with the house buyer's attorney, $375,000, a substantial sum that would be paid directly to me, separate from the house sale. Proceeds? The trust Michael had created was officially nullified, and the $985,000 from the house sale, minus Vanessa's commission, which had already been paid, would be transferred to my personal account within 5 business days. Michael had requested another meeting before the signing, this time alone. I agreed, suggesting the small park near Eleanor's house where I'd been taking short walks as part of my recovery regimen. It was public enough to feel safe, but private enough for difficult conversations. He arrived precisely at the agreed time, dressed more casually than at our legal meeting, looking more like the son I remembered. I was already seated on a bench, overlooking a small pond, feeling the autumn sun warm on my face despite the cooling temperatures. "Mom," he greeted me, hesitating before sitting beside me. He left a careful space between us, as if unsure of his welcome. "Michael," I nodded. "Thank you for coming." He stared out at the water for a long moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about everything, about what happened, about why I did what I did." He took a deep breath. "I owe you an explanation, though I'm not sure I fully understand it, myself." I waited, giving him space to find his words. "After Dad died, something changed in how I saw you. It wasn't immediate, but gradually, you became fragile in my mind. I started noticing the little things, how you sometimes searched for words, how you moved more carefully down the stairs, how you'd occasionally call me by your brother's name before catching yourself. Normal aging," I said quietly. "Not dementia. Not incompetence." "I know that now," he acknowledged. "But I think I was looking for signs of decline because it would justify taking control. The truth is, Mom, I've been financially stretched for years. Vanessa's spending, the kids, private school, maintaining a lifestyle we couldn't quite afford. I kept expecting Dad's inheritance to solve everything someday, but then you just kept being healthy and independent, and that someday never came. The raw honesty was both painful and necessary. So, when I needed surgery, you saw an opportunity." Looked down at his hands. "It sounds terrible when you put it that way, but yes, it started as just helping you transition to somewhere more manageable. Then Vanessa pointed out that selling the house made sense, especially with the real estate market so strong. One decision led to another, And suddenly we were creating trusts and making arrangements, all while telling ourselves it was for your own good. And the SUV? The swimming pool? He had the grace to look ashamed. The money was there. We'd been wanting those things for so long. It seemed like finally we could have the life we'd been working toward. With my house proceeds, I noted, keeping my voice level despite the hurt his admissions caused. I told myself you didn't need it all. He confessed. That you'd want us to enjoy it, that you'd be happier in a simpler living situation anyway. I convinced myself it wasn't really taking from you, just accelerating the inevitable. I let his words hang in the air between us, weighing them against decades of relationship, of love, of what I thought I knew about my son. I'm not proud of it, he continued when I didn't immediately respond. Seeing how you handled everything, the legal meeting, the negotiations, it reminded me of who you've always been, strong, capable, strategic. I forgot that somewhere along the way, started seeing only what I wanted to see. Why are you telling me this now? I asked finally. The agreements are drawn up. The legal issues are nearly resolved. Because I want to try to fix what I broke, he said simply. Not the legal stuff. That's settled. And you deserve every penny. But our relationship. I don't expect forgiveness right away. I know I've violated your trust in fundamental ways. But I'm hoping that with time, with different choices moving forward, we might find a way back to being family. I studied my son's face, searching for sincerity, for the boy I'd raised. What does Vanessa think about all this? His expression tightened slightly. We're working through some things. She's not happy about how this has turned out, financially speaking. But that's not your problem. It's ours to solve. And the children? My grandchildren? They miss you, he said, his voice softening. They keep asking when they can see Grandma again. I've been vague, not wanting to drag them into adult problems, but they're perceptive. They know something's wrong. I thought of Emma's science projects that I'd helped with, of Lucas's budding interest in aviation that I'd nurtured with stories from my service days, of little Zoe who loved to help me in the garden. I missed them fiercely, these innocent extensions of our complicated family. I'd like to see them, I said. Not at your house, not yet. Perhaps at the park, or they could visit me at Eleanor's with proper notice. He nodded quickly. Of course. Whatever makes you comfortable. We sat in silence for a while, watching ducks glide across the pond surface, leaving ripples in their wake. So much had changed between us. Yet here we were, mother and son, still connected despite everything. I'm planning to develop the land, I said eventually, deciding to share my vision. Create accessible housing for disabled veterans. Use what happened as a catalyst for something positive. His surprise was evident. That's ambitious. I've never lacked ambition, Michael, or capability. That's what you forgot. He absorbed this, nodding slowly. I'd like to hear more about it, if you're willing to share. I might be, eventually. I wasn't ready to bring him into this new chapter. Yet, but I could leave the door ajar, create space for future possibility. As our conversation wound down and Michael prepared to leave, he hesitated, then asked the question that perhaps had been on his mind throughout. Where will you live now, Mom? Really? I smiled, feeling a sense of certainty that had been missing in recent weeks. For now, with Eleanor, until I'm fully recovered. Then, I'm considering one of the first units in my development. I'll have architects design it to my specifications, single level, fully accessible as I age, but with a workshop space for my projects and garden beds raised to accommodate any future mobility issues. You've thought of everything, he said, something like respect returning to his voice. I've had to, I replied simply. That's what happens when you realize no one else will put your needs first. You learn to do it for yourself. He flinched slightly at that, but nodded in acknowledgement. As he stood to leave, he reached out as if to hug me, then stopped himself, uncertain of his welcome. I made no move to bridge the gap. Some distances would take more than words to cross. I'll call about arranging a visit with the kids, he said instead. And Mom, I really am sorry for all of it. I know, I responded, because I did. He was sorry. Sorry he'd been caught. Sorry his plans had unraveled. But perhaps also genuinely sorry for betraying my trust. Only time would reveal which form of remorse would ultimately guide his actions. As I watched him walk away, I felt a complex mixture of grief and determination. Something precious had been damaged, perhaps irreparably. But from that damage, something new was already taking root. A vision not just for my own future, but for others who had served their country and deserved dignity and independence in return. Thus, formal signing took place at Bill's office the following morning. Michael and Vanessa arrived with their attorney, faces composed in neutral expressions that revealed nothing of our conversation in the park. The house buyers, a young couple named James and Sarah Chen with a toddler and another baby on the way, joined us, clearly relieved that a solution had been found for the land issue without disrupting their purchase. We've never heard of separate deeds for land and structure, James admitted, as we all settled around the conference table. When we got the call about the complication, we were terrified we'd lost our dream home. It's an unusual arrangement, Bill acknowledged, organizing the multiple documents requiring signatures. But we've developed a framework that protects everyone's interests. I studied the young family covertly as Bill explained the agreements. Sarah was visibly pregnant, perhaps 6 or 7 months along, with the same excited nervousness I remembered, feeling before Michael was born. Their son, about 2 years old, was being entertained in the corner by a patient grandfather who had accompanied them. The sight of the older man gently building block towers for the toddler to knock down caused an unexpected pang. Robert should have had those years with our grandchildren. Mrs. Winters has agreed to grant you permanent easement rights to the land for a one-time payment, Bill was explaining. This gives you legal access to and use of the property while she retains ownership of the land itself. And the future development? Sarah asked, glancing at me with curiosity. I nodded to Bill, who proceeded to outline my vision for the remaining portion of the property. Mrs. Winters intends to develop accessible housing units for disabled veterans on the unused portions of the land. Construction wouldn't begin for at least 18 months, and all development would fully respect your privacy and home value. James and Sarah exchanged glances. Actually, James said, we think that's wonderful. My uncle served in Iraq and lost his leg. Finding appropriate housing has been one of his biggest challenges. The plans include communal garden spaces, I added, speaking directly to them for the first time. I noticed from your social media that you're interested in sustainable gardening. Perhaps that could become a point of connection rather than division. Sarah's expression brightened. We'd love that. I studied horticulture therapy in grad school. The healing potential of gardens for trauma survivors is remarkable. An unexpected ally, perhaps even a future collaborator. The universe worked in mysterious ways. As we proceeded through the signing process, I was acutely aware of Michael and Vanessa across the table. Michael maintained a respectful demeanor, signing where indicated without objection. Vanessa's smile remained fixed and professional, though it didn't reach her eyes. When she signed the document transferring the house sale proceeds to my account, her pen pressed so hard it nearly tore the paper. There's one additional matter, I said, as the final documents were being notarized. I withdrew a folder from my bag and slid it across to Michael. A list of personal items I'd like removed from the house before the Chens take possession. Family photos, my military memorabilia, specific furniture pieces with sentimental value. Eleanor and I can arrange pickup next week. Michael nodded, taking the folder. Of course. I'll make sure everything's ready. Thank you. 2 simple words, yet they felt monumental. the first normal, almost cordial exchange we'd had in weeks. After the signing concluded and the others filtered out, I found myself alone briefly with the Chens. Sarah approached me somewhat hesitantly. "Mrs. Winters, I want you to know we'll take good care of your home. James has already promised to maintain your rose garden. It's one of the features that made us fall in love with the place." The mention of my roses, cultivated over decades with cuttings from my grandmother's garden, brought unexpected emotion. "The white climber on the south trellis needs to be cut back in early spring, not late winter," I found myself saying. "And the heritage teas prefer coffee grounds mixed into their fertilizer." Sarah pulled out her phone, quickly making notes. Would you mind if I called you occasionally with questions? About the garden, the house quirks, the neighborhood?" Such a simple request, yet it offered a surprising balm to the pain of losing my home. The knowledge that it would be loved, that my carefully tended roses would bloom for another generation, that the house's history wouldn't be erased but continued. "I'd like that," I said sincerely. Later that afternoon, as Eleanor drove us back to her house, she glanced over at me. "You're quiet. Everything okay after all that legal wrangling?" I gazed out the window at the familiar streets of the town where I'd spent most of my adult life. "It's strange. I've lost my home but somehow gained possibilities." "That's because you're a tactical genius," Eleanor said with conviction. "You turned their attempt to control you into an opportunity to create something meaningful. Pure military strategy. Transform the terrain to your advantage." I smiled at her assessment. Maybe. Or maybe it's just that I've stopped seeing myself through their eyes and remembered who I actually am. A badass helicopter mechanic who's about to become a property developer and veterans advocate? Exactly that. The next week passed in a flurry of activity. With the legal issues resolved and funds secured, I began assembling a team to help realize my vision for the Veterans Housing Project. Eleanor introduced me to an architect friend who specialized in accessible design. Bill connected me with the local VA hospital's community outreach coordinator. I reached out to my old service unit, finding several members who had expertise in project management, construction, or disability advocacy. What had begun as a defensive reaction, "What can I do with this land now?" was rapidly evolving into a purposeful mission. Each night I fell into bed at Eleanor's house exhausted but invigorated, my mind racing with plans, possibilities, and potential. My recovery progressed steadily as well. The surgical site healed cleanly, and my physical therapy exercises gradually restored mobility. I graduated from the walker to a cane, and the pain medication was reduced to occasional use only. Dr. Santiago, my VA physician, remarked on my improved vitality during my follow-up appointment. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," she advised, reviewing my charts. "Your recovery metrics are exceeding expectations across the board." "I have a project," I told her. "Something worth getting better for." As promised, Michael arranged for my grandchildren to visit Eleanor's house the following Sunday afternoon. Their arrival brought a whirlwind of energy into the quiet space. 10-year-old Emma immediately asking about my robot leg, her term for my temporary brace. 7-year-old Lucas shyly presenting me with a hand-drawn get-well card featuring a remarkably detailed helicopter, and 4-year-old Zoe climbing directly into my lap as if no time had passed. "Grandma, are you still sick?" Zoe asked, patting my cheek with solemn concern. "Not sick, sweetheart. Just healing," I assured her, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I had to get some old parts fixed." "Like when Daddy took the car to the shop?" Lucas asked, his interest piqued by the mechanical comparison. "Exactly like that. And now I'm almost good as new." Emma, always the most perceptive of the three, settled beside me on the couch. "Dad said you're not coming back to your house. He said, you're building a new place for soldiers instead." "Veterans," I corrected gently. People who served in the military, like I did, and who need special houses because they were injured. Is that why you're staying with Ms. Eleanor? Because you need a special house? Her brow furrowed with the serious concentration of a child. Trying to understand adult complexities, I considered how to answer truthfully without burdening her with the full situation. Partly, my old house had too many stairs for me right now, and Ms. Eleanor's house is all on one level, which is better while I'm healing. And soon, I'll help design a perfect new house that works for me and for other veterans, too. This explanation seemed to satisfy her. The children stayed for 2 hours, filling Eleanor's usually quiet home with games, stories, and the kind of unreserved affection only children can offer. Michael remained in the background, supervising but giving me space to reconnect with my grandchildren. When it was time to leave, he helped gather their scattered belongings while they delivered goodbye hugs. "They've missed you," he said quietly as the children raced to the car ahead of us. "We all have." I nodded, acknowledging his words without fully accepting them. "I've missed them too. Thank you for bringing them." "Mom, about the personal items you wanted from the house." He hesitated. "I've packed everything on your list, but there's more. Photo albums, your military uniforms, Dad's old records, things I thought you might want but weren't specifically listed." "Yes, I'd like those too. I thought maybe, if you're feeling up to it, you could come by tomorrow. See for yourself if there's anything else before the Chens move in next week." The invitation caught me off guard. I hadn't expected to return to my home before the new owners took possession. Wasn't sure if I was emotionally prepared to see it one last time, emptied of the life Robert and I had built there. "Eleanor could drive you," Michael added, perhaps sensing my hesitation. "Vanessa will be at her office all day. It would just be us." That detail, Vanessa's absence, made the difference. I wasn't ready to face her controlled smile and judgmental eyes, not in the space that had once been my sanctuary. "All right," I agreed. "Tomorrow afternoon." The house looked smaller somehow as Eleanor's car pulled into the familiar driveway, the Y, next day. The for sale sign had been updated with a bold red sold banner across it, Vanessa's professional headshot smiling up at us from the corner. The autumn light cast long shadows across the lawn where the first fallen leaves had begun to gather. "Want me to come in with you?" Eleanor asked as she turned off the engine. I shook my head. "This is something I need to do myself. But thank you." Michael was waiting at the door, his expression a mixture of nervousness and hope. "I put everything in the living room for you to look through," he said after awkward greetings. "Take your time. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." I stepped inside, the familiar scent of home, a combination of lemon furniture polish, old hardwood, and the faint ghost of Robert's pipe tobacco that had never quite disappeared, enveloping me like an embrace. The rooms were half empty already, some furniture gone, walls bare of photographs and art. Yet the bones of the place remained unchanged. The worn spot on the third stair where countless feet had trod, the south-facing windows that filled the living room with light, the kitchen, doorway where we'd marked Michael's height with pencil lines throughout his childhood. In the living room, cardboard boxes and plastic storage bins were neatly arranged, each labeled in Michael's precise handwriting. Mom's military, photo albums 1980s, Mom's garden journals, Dad's records. Beside them stood the pieces of furniture I'd requested, my reading chair that had conformed perfectly to my body over decades of use, the small secretary desk where I'd paid bills and written letters, the handcrafted bookshelf Robert had made. For our 5th anniversary, I moved through the boxes slowly, opening each one to confirm its contents, occasionally removing an item to examine more closely. My dress uniform with its rows of medals, the family photo album from our cross-country trip when Michael was 12, the collection of garden tools my unit had given me upon retirement, each handle engraved with my name and rank. In one unmarked box, I found something unexpected. Dozens of letters, still in their original envelopes, the paper yellowed with age. Letters Robert and I had exchanged during deployments, hundreds, of them spanning decades of service and separation. I'd thought they were stored in the attic, had forgotten about them entirely in the chaos of recent events. I found those when I was clearing the attic storage, Michael said quietly from the doorway. I didn't read them, didn't feel right, but I thought you'd want them. I do, I managed, my fingers tracing Robert's handwriting on the uppermost envelope. Thank you for finding these. Michael nodded, then gestured toward the back of the house. Did you want to see the garden one last time? The roses are still blooming. The garden. My sanctuary, my canvas, my therapy through difficult times. Yes, I whispered. I'd like that. The garden welcomed me like an old friend, familiar yet subtly changed by my absence. Late autumn had transformed the carefully tended beds, summers. Vibrant colors giving way to more subdued hues and seed heads standing like sentinels against the cloudless sky. My heritage roses still bloomed along the south fence, defiant against the season's change, their fragrance drawing me forward down the stone path Robert had laid by hand one summer long ago. I moved slowly, my cane providing stability on the uneven ground, touching plants as I passed. The lavender I'd planted after my first deployment, the herb spiral we'd constructed from stones gathered on family vacations, the maple tree planted when Michael was born, now towering above the yard. Each had a story, a memory, a purpose in this space I'd cultivated for decades. You always amazed me with this garden, Michael said, following a few steps behind. How you could make things grow when everyone else failed. Remember that winter when all the neighbors' roses died in the freeze, but yours came back stronger? I nodded, pausing before my prized white climbing rose, still offering a few pristine blooms against the weathered trellis. It's not magic, just patience and understanding what each plant needs. Giving them the right conditions to thrive, then trusting them to do what they're naturally designed to do. Is that how you raised me too? He asked quietly. The question caught me off guard, its simplicity belying the complex emotions beneath. I turned to look at my son, standing in the garden where he'd played as a child, where he'd learned to ride a bike, where he'd later announced his engagement to Vanessa under the arbor of wisteria I'd trained for that very purpose. I tried, I answered honestly, though perhaps I was better with plants than people. Plants communicate their needs clearly if you pay attention. People are more complicated. I should have told you what was happening, he admitted. About the financial struggles, about Vanessa's spending, about my own fears. Instead of making decisions behind your back, I should have come to you directly. Yes, you should have. I wouldn't offer easy absolution. We might have found solutions together. He nodded, accepting this truth without defensiveness. The Chens asked if they could keep your garden journal, the one where you mapped all the plantings and maintenance schedules. I told them I needed to ask you first. I considered this request, visualizing the leather-bound book where I'd documented decades of garden evolution, plant varieties, bloom times, pruning notes, successes and failures meticulously recorded in my precise handwriting. It was a deeply personal document, almost a diary of my life measured in growing seasons rather than calendar years. They can have copies of the practical information, I decided. Planting maps, care instructions, variety names. But the original stays with me. I'll let them know, Michael said. They really do respect what you've created here. Sarah's already talking about continuing your composting system and adding native plants to attract more pollinators. We continued through the garden in companionable silence, reaching the small stone patio in the northwest corner, my favorite spot, where the evening sun cast a golden glow across the space. Robert had built the curved bench against the fence, positioning it perfectly to catch both morning and afternoon light depending on the season. We'd spent countless hours there together, planning our futures, solving problems, simply being present with each other, and the natural world we'd cultivated. I lowered myself onto the bench, feeling the familiar contours of stone that had supported me through joy and grief alike. Michael hesitated, then sat beside me, maintaining a respectful distance. "I've been thinking a lot about legacy," I said, watching a chickadee flit between the bird feeders I'd positioned for optimal viewing from this spot. What we leave behind, what marks we make on the world. Michael nodded, his gaze following mine to the busy bird. "Dad used to talk about that too, especially after his first heart attack. He was worried about providing for us materially, but also about the intangible inheritance, values, memories, wisdom. Your father was a thoughtful man." I smiled slightly, remembering Robert's philosophical side that had balanced my more practical nature. He would have hated what happened between us these past weeks. "I know," Michael acknowledged, his voice low. "He always said the true measure of a family was how they treated each other when it would be easier not to care." I turned to look at my son directly, searching his face for the boy I'd raised, the man I'd been proud of, beneath the stranger who had betrayed my trust. "Why, Michael?" Not the justifications or the excuses, the real truth. "Why did you think it was acceptable to sell my home and control my assets while I was vulnerable?" He didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the garden as if seeking wisdom from the plants I'd tended. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with realization. "Because I started seeing you as a problem to solve rather than a person to respect." The raw honesty in his voice caught us both by surprise. "After Dad died, after your fall last winter, I started categorizing you as elderly in my mind, which made it easier to dismiss your autonomy. And once I'd put you in that box, decisions about your life seemed like mine to make." "I'm still the same woman who flew helicopters in combat zones," I reminded him. "The same woman who rebuilt engines while taking night classes to earn my degree. Age hasn't fundamentally changed who I am." "I know that now," he said. "Seeing you navigate this situation, outmaneuvering me legally, developing a vision for the property, it's been a powerful reminder of who you've always been." A pair of cardinals landed on the nearest feeder, the vibrant male deferring to his more subdued mate with a seed offering. I'd always loved watching their partnership, the way they communicated through subtle movements and maintained their bond year-round, unlike many other bird species. "The Veterans Housing Project," Michael began hesitantly. "It's an impressive vision. I've been reading about similar developments in other states. They're making real differences in people's lives." "That's the intention," I agreed. "To create spaces where independence and dignity are built into the very architecture, where service-related disabilities don't mean dependence or isolation. Would you—" He paused, seeming uncertain whether to continue. "Would you be open to my professional involvement? Not taking over," he added quickly, "but offering support. My firm has experience with multi-unit developments, and accessibility requirements are one of our specialties." The offer surprised me. Michael's architectural practice had focused primarily on high-end residential and commercial properties in recent years, projects that showcased luxury rather than practical necessity. "This would be different from your usual work," I observed. "Smaller budgets, different priorities." "That's part of why I'm interested," he admitted. "Lately I've been questioning the value of what I do, designing spaces that only the wealthy can access, prioritizing aesthetics over function. This project has purpose beyond profit." I considered his offer, weighing the potential benefits against the still raw breach of trust between us. His professional expertise would be valuable. His firm's reputation could open doors with planning, committees, and funding organizations. Yet mixing family with business carried risks, especially when our relationship remained fragile. "I'll consider it," I said finally. "But if, and it's a significant if, we work together on this, it would be strictly professional, clear boundaries, defined roles, Written agreements. No informal arrangements, no assumptions, no decisions made without full consultation. He nodded, accepting these terms without protest. That's fair. More than fair, given everything. We sat, a while longer as afternoon light lengthened the shadows across the garden. Birds continued their activities around us. Squirrels chased along the fence line, and a gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes Robert had hung from the old oak tree on our 20th anniversary. "I've been offered a teaching position," I said after a comfortable silence. "At the community college. Introduction to Aviation Mechanics, starting next semester. Just one class to begin with, 3 days a week." Michael's expression registered. Surprise, then something like respect. "You'd be excellent at that, sharing your knowledge with a new generation." That's what I thought. It's part-time, with flexible hours that would work well alongside the housing development project. I hadn't planned to share this news with him today, but something about the garden's familiar embrace had opened a space for cautious connection. "The department chair is a former airborne. He contacted me after hearing about my project from someone at the VA. The veteran network in action," Michael observed with a small smile. "You've always said it's the most efficient communication system in existence, second only to garden club gossip," I agreed, returning his smile briefly before growing serious again. "I'm rebuilding my life, Michael. Not returning to what was, but creating something new that honors who I am now and what I still have to contribute." He nodded, understanding the subtext, that this rebuilding process applied to our relationship as well. What had been broken could not be simply restored. Something new would have to be constructed in its place, something that acknowledged the damage done while finding a path forward. "Mom," he began, hesitancy in his voice. "There's something else I need to tell you, about Vanessa and me." I waited, noting the tension that had entered his posture. "We're separating," he said simply. "It's been coming for a while, but this situation brought everything to a head. Her priorities and mine, they're fundamentally different. The way she's handled this, her focus on appearances and assets rather than what was right." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I kept making excuses, rationalizing, but I can't do it anymore." This revelation was unexpected. Despite their obvious differences, Michael and Vanessa had seemed a united front, particularly in their approach to my situation. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it despite everything. No parent wants to see their child in pain, even when that pain might lead to necessary growth. "The kids will stay with me in the house," he continued. "Vanessa's taking a position with a luxury real estate firm in the city. She says she needs to focus on her career right now." The bitterness in his voice revealed wounds beyond what he was sharing directly. "It won't be easy for any of you," I acknowledged, thinking of my grandchildren facing this significant change. "But children are resilient when surrounded by love and honesty. That's what I'm counting on," he said. "And I'm hoping they'll have their grandmother's influence more consistently in their lives going forward, if you're willing." The invitation, tentative, respectful of my autonomy in a way his recent actions had not been, touched something deep within me. The relationship with my son had been damaged, perhaps permanently altered, but my connection to his children remained a precious, salvageable bond. "I'd like that," I said softly. "They're part of my legacy, too." As the afternoon light began to fade, signaling time to leave, I took one last survey of the garden that had been my sanctuary for so many years. Each plant, each stone, each carefully considered element held memories and meaning. Leaving would be painful, yet I found myself surprisingly at peace with the transition. "Someone told me once that gardens aren't really possessions," I said, rising slowly from the bench. "They're relationships, temporary stewardships of something always changing, always growing beyond our control. Perhaps houses are the same." Michael helped steady me on the uneven path as we made our way back toward the house. "Will you visit after the Chens move in?" Sarah specifically mentioned hoping you'd see how they maintain and expand what you've created. I considered this, trying to imagine returning to this space when it was no longer mine, when other children played on the lawn and other hands tended the plants I'd nurtured. Perhaps, I said. In time. When it feels like offering wisdom, rather, than mourning loss. He nodded, understanding the distinction. At the garden gate, I paused for one final look, committing to memory the peaceful scene, my legacy in living form, soon to be tended by new hands, but forever bearing the imprint of my care. It's time to go, I said, more to myself than to Michael. Eleanor will be waiting. As we walked back through the house toward the front door, past the boxes of memories and belongings that would soon be transported to their new homes, I felt the weight of the past lightening somewhat. What had been taken from me, my home, my garden, temporarily my autonomy, had created space for unexpected new growth, a meaningful project serving fellow veterans, a teaching opportunity sharing hard-won knowledge, and perhaps, in time, a rebuilt relationship with my son based on genuine respect rather than obligation. 6 months later, I stood on a patch of bare earth that had once been my side yard, watching as the construction crew positioned the first prefabricated wall section of what would become Veterans Haven, a 6-unit accessible housing community designed specifically for disabled service members. The April sunshine was warm on my face, a gentle spring breeze carrying the scent of freshly turned soil and the promise of new beginnings. "Looking good, Commander," called Eleanor from beside the blueprint table, using the nickname that had stuck among the project team, most of them veterans themselves who appreciated having clear leadership and a mission-oriented approach. I walked over to join her, my cane now used more out of caution than necessity. The hip replacement had healed remarkably well, allowing me to move with greater ease than I had in years. Dr. Santiago credited my rapid recovery to having a purpose that kept me active and engaged. "The foundation measurements are spot on," Eleanor reported, gesturing to the concrete pad where the first unit would stand. "Contractor says we're still on schedule for completion by Veterans Day. Perfect timing for the dedication ceremony," I noted, scanning the detailed site plans spread across the table. The project had evolved significantly from my initial concept. What began as a simple idea for a few accessible units had developed into a comprehensive living community designed to support independence while fostering connection. Each home would feature universal design principles, zero-step entries, wheelchair-accessible kitchens and bathrooms, smart home technology that could be adapted for various disabilities. The communal areas included raised garden beds, a shared workshop space, and a small community room for gatherings and support services. Funding had come together more easily than anticipated. My story, a female veteran using her own property to create housing for disabled service members after her son attempted to sell her home during hospitalization, had resonated powerfully with several foundations. Local veterans organizations had rallied support, arranging for donated materials and discounted labor. Even the VA had provided a substantial grant through their housing initiative for disabled veterans. "Mom?" I turned to see Michael approaching from the street, hard hat in hand, architectural portfolio tucked under his arm. Despite my initial reservations, his professional involvement had proven valuable. His firm had provided the technical expertise needed to navigate zoning regulations and building codes while respecting my vision and leadership. Our personal relationship remained a work in progress. The trust broken by his actions during my hospitalization couldn't be instantly restored, but we had established a new pattern of interaction based on clearer boundaries and more honest communication. Weekly dinners with him and the children had become part of my routine, a gradual rebuilding of family connections on more equal footing. "The accessibility consultant approved the final bathroom designs," he reported, opening his portfolio to show me the updated plans. "And the solar panel supplier confirmed delivery for next month." I nodded, examining the detailed drawings. What? About the kitchen countertop heights? Were they able to incorporate the adjustable sections? Yes, though it required some custom fabrication. I've scheduled a meeting with the cabinet maker for Thursday if you want to join. I'll be there, I confirmed, making a note in the small notebook I'd taken to carrying. A habit from my military days that had proven useful in managing the countless details of property development. As Michael walked off to consult with the construction foreman, I took a moment to survey the full property. Behind the construction site, my former home stood unchanged from the street, now occupied by the Chen family who had, as promised, maintained the gardens with respectful care. Sarah had become an unexpected friend, consulting me regularly about plant care and gradually adding her own thoughtful touches to the landscape. The land arrangement had worked as planned. They owned the house structure and paid a nominal annual fee for access rights to the land beneath it, while I retained ownership of the larger parcel now being developed. What could have been an adversarial situation had instead evolved into a mutually beneficial partnership. A car pulled into the temporary parking area, and I recognized Bill Roberts emerging with a folder under his arm. He had remained involved with the project, helping navigate the legal complexities of creating a sustainable management structure for the housing units once completed. "Julia," he greeted me, shaking hands warmly. "Impressive progress since my last visit." "We broke ground 6 weeks ago," I confirmed. "Moving faster than expected thanks to the prefabrication approach. I brought the finalized bylaws for the Veterans Housing Cooperative," he said, offering the folder. "Once you've reviewed them, we can file the official paperwork establishing the nonprofit entity that will manage operations long-term." This had been one of my primary concerns, ensuring that Veterans Haven would continue serving its intended purpose beyond my lifetime. With Bill's guidance, we had developed a cooperative ownership model where residents would have secure housing rights, while a board composed primarily of veterans would oversee property management and future development. "I'll review these tonight," I promised, accepting the documents. Bill nodded, then hesitated slightly. "I also wanted to let you know, there's been another case, similar to yours. An Army veteran in his 70s, hospitalized for heart surgery. Daughter sold his farm while he was recovering, claiming the medical power of attorney gave her authority." I frowned, the echo of my own experience stirring unwelcome memories. "What happened?" "The VA legal team caught it before the sale completed. They're using your case as precedent to challenge the transaction." Bill's expression softened. "Your willingness to speak publicly about what happened has had ripple effects, Julia. The VA has implemented new protective protocols for veterans entering medical care, specifically addressing property vulnerabilities during hospitalization. This news brought unexpected satisfaction. My private ordeal had created systemic change, potentially protecting others from similar exploitation. One person's experience becoming policy," I murmured. "That's how progress happens, isn't it?" "Exactly," Bill agreed. "Your story has become something of a cautionary tale in veterans' legal circles, and an empowering one, too. Remember the helicopter mechanic whose son forgot she owned the land?" I laughed at his characterization, appreciating how the painful experience had been transformed into a teaching tool. "Not exactly the legacy I anticipated, but I'll take it." As Bill moved on to discuss the legal details with Eleanor, I walked slowly toward the edge of the property where my new home was taking shape, a single-level residence slightly larger than the other units, designed to accommodate not just my needs but also my new role as property manager and community coordinator. My teaching position at the community college had expanded to 2 courses per semester, introducing both veterans and civilian students to the fundamentals of aviation mechanics. The work was deeply satisfying, allowing me to share decades of practical knowledge while mentoring a new generation of potential service members. Life had taken an unexpected turn, redirecting me from the quiet retirement I had anticipated to a dynamic third act combining advocacy, education, and community building. The loss of my longtime home, painful as it had been, had ultimately prompted this new chapter, one that honored my military service while creating tangible benefits for others who had served. From across the construction site, I heard my name called. A young woman in an Army physical therapy uniform was approaching, accompanied by an older man in a wheelchair, Master Sergeant Jenkins, the first approved resident for Veterans Haven, coming for his orientation tour. I squared my shoulders and moved forward to greet them, feeling the familiar sense of purpose that had defined my military career, now infusing this civilian mission. The betrayal that had begun this journey had been transformed into something meaningful, not erased or forgotten, but repurposed into a foundation for something stronger, something lasting, something that would serve others long after I was gone. As I extended my hand to the Master Sergeant, introducing myself and welcoming him to what would soon be his home, I caught sight of the Chen family in my former garden, Sarah kneeling beside my heritage roses, carefully pruning with techniques I had taught her. Life continued. Plants grew. Old wounds, while never completely forgotten, could heal into scars that strengthened rather than weakened. And sometimes, the land beneath our feet, land that others might overlook or take for granted, could become the solid foundation for an entirely new beginning. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in hues of amber and rose, I settled into the comfortable chair on Eleanor's porch with a cup of tea and the leather-bound journal I'd been keeping since the project began. Next to me sat a small wooden box containing the letters Robert and I had exchanged during our deployments, treasures rescued from my former home, now serving as both comfort and compass as I navigated this unexpected chapter of life. A text. Message chimed on my phone. It was from Sarah Chen. The white climbing rose has its first bloom of the season. Thought you might like to see. Attached was a photo of the pristine white flower against the weathered trellis, the same rose I had tenderly cultivated for decades, now thriving under different care. I smiled, typing back my thanks before setting the phone aside. There was poetry in this continuation, my roses still blooming, my land still serving a purpose, my knowledge still being passed along, though in ways I never could have anticipated. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway drew my attention. Michael's sedan parked beside Eleanor's compact SUV, and all three of my grandchildren tumbled out, racing toward the porch with the boundless energy of youth. "Grandma! Grandma!" Zoe called, waving a paper clutched in her small hand. I drew. "Your new house!" The children swarmed up the steps, surrounding me with their enthusiasm. Emma carefully set a potted plant beside my chair, a cutting from my garden. I realized that she had rooted herself under Sarah's guidance. Lucas carried a model he'd constructed of the Veterans Haven layout, complete with tiny flags marking each residence. Michael followed more slowly, carrying a large rolled document. "The final permits came through," he announced, his expression reflecting professional satisfaction rather than personal triumph. "We can proceed with the second phase whenever you're ready." As the children shared their creations and updates about school, I felt the weight of the past 6 months, the betrayal, the legal battles, the physical recovery, balanced now by the promise of what lay ahead. Not just buildings rising from the earth, but connections rebuilt, lessons learned, purpose renewed. Later, after Michael had taken the children home and Eleanor had retired to her room, I opened my journal to a fresh page and began to write. Today, we placed the first walls of Veterans Haven. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined standing on that land as a developer rather than a homeowner, couldn't have pictured the community now taking shape on the property I almost lost. When Michael sold my house during my hospitalization, he believed he was solving a problem, managing an aging parent, securing an inheritance, simplifying complicated family dynamics. What he didn't realize was that in trying to control my future, he inadvertently set me free to create one entirely different from what any of us had imagined. The land beneath our feet matters, literally in my case, as it became my legal salvation. but it matters metaphorically too. The ground we stand on, the foundations we build upon, the territories we claim as our own, all shape the lives we construct. Michael forgot I owned the land beneath my house. In doing so, he overlooked something essential about me as well. That, beneath the surface of aging mother and widow and grandmother, lay the bedrock of a woman who had navigated war zones, mastered complex machinery, and built a life of service and purpose. Some might see my story as one of loss. I have come to see it differently. What I lost was a house. What I gained was a mission. And sometimes that makes all the difference. I closed the journal, my tea long since gone cold, and looked out. Toward the future taking shape on land that had always been, and would always remain, undeniably mine.